of introducing to you Dr. Nupur Raje. She is a faculty at Mass General Hospital and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, USA. And she is not only a good friend for so many years, but she has really been in the middle of COVID, both in the hospital and at home. So I hand over to Dr. Nupur Raje for sharing her thoughts and her experience with all of us here today. Dr. Nupur Raje, please.
Thank you so much, Purvesh, and thank you so much for making me a part of this meeting. And I really appreciate being able to speak with all of you. I don't have any sort of a formal presentation, but what I was hoping to do today was kind of walk you through this whole COVID experience, how we as an institution got ready for handling COVID in Massachusetts, and how me at home actually had to go through the whole experience of having me being tested COVID positive, as well as my husband, Jagmeet, who a lot of you know already, also had pretty serious illness from COVID. So, it was a learning process for us. I have been extremely public about our whole experience. And part of the reason for being public about this experience was there was so little known about this. And when we, in fact, got it, it was early on in the course. So there was a lot of learning, I thought, from this. And we really wanted to make sure that we served as a resource to our colleagues, not only in Massachusetts and in Boston, but more importantly, the world over, because there's so little known about this virus and we're still learning about it. So what I thought I would do is, I'm unfortunately at work, so I might get paged out, but what I thought I would do is kind of walk you through our experience of COVID as a patient, and then talk a little bit about how we as an institution at MGH have kind of ramped up, because Massachusetts was not quite in the center of the storm. But if you look at the data, Massachusetts unfortunately is number 3 in the United States in terms of the number of cases with COVID. So we have been really badly impacted in the Northeast, and how we as a cancer center have prepared for the surge, and how we've coped with the surge, and how we've managed our patients is something I will talk about in the latter part. So I think I'll start out with our experience with COVID first, because it started off way back early. This was just about the time when we were learning about COVID-19. So it was early March when I think around the 10th or 11th of March, where Jagmeet ended up with a fever, and a fever which was pretty high grade. He had 102, I think 101 point something fever. And, right at the get-go, he knew it was different from the flu. He had no other symptoms but just a high fever with chills. And very early on, this was a Wednesday. By Friday, when the fever hadn't gone away, we got him tested. So we knew he was COVID positive from early on. As soon as he had that high fever, I actually self-quarantined with him. And, week 1 was okay. So by Saturday, his fever started on Wednesday. By Saturday afternoon, we knew he was COVID positive. And he was generally doing okay the first week, high fevers, lots of weight loss. He lost about 14 pounds, but, I was fine with that, saying he's going to be okay. I think it was week 2, which was around day 7 or day 8, where the fever had certainly abated, not gone away, but he was having fevers of about 100 as opposed to 101. So it used to be 99.8, 100, 100.6, around that. And I think the big turning point for me was around day 7, day 8, he started coughing. Day 6, he started coughing. And it was a really dry cough, which was concerning to me. And on the Friday, which was day 10 of his whole experience, I actually called my chief at the cancer center and said, I'd much rather bring him in. We at that time as a cancer center were really at the forefront of COVID in our hospital. It was just the beginning of COVID. And because of the fact that, we are generally internists, and because of the fact that we have laminar airflows and stuff like that, the cancer center was sort of front and center of managing COVID at Mass General. So we'd arranged a bed for Jack to come into, and the plan was for me to drive him into the hospital. I had the car parked right outside. I actually live very close to the hospital. But as the day progressed, he was just not right. His breathing was okay. He was coughing, but he was not with it actually. And for me, we have a house which is many levels. It's a townhouse with 4 levels, and for me to bring him down the stairs would have been impossible. And I ended up having to call 911 and bring him to the hospital. And when you call 911, we always have to come through the emergency room. And in retrospect, I think that was a good idea, because in the emergency room, we ended up getting a imaging of his chest. We ended up getting a CAT scan, and he had a full, pretty much whiteout of his lungs bilaterally, which I was not expecting. I was hoping he's going to come in, get some blood work, so I have some sense of which way things are going. But this was clearly a picture which was very worrisome. He was still maintaining his oxygen sats, but when they saw that scan, they actually shipped him to the ICU. So he stayed in the medical ICU for a day or so. And at that time, early on, we were intubating people early. We didn't end up having to do that, and I think that's partly because of him refusing the intubation, because the question there was always, are you tiring out, and would you much rather be intubated? He stayed in the ICU for about 24 hours. He was able to maintain his oxygen saturations and then was moved to a COVID floor. But while all of this was going on, he was still spiking fevers. The fevers were certainly low grade, and he was also we do in-house follow sort of inflammatory markers. So we were following his CRP, his sed rate, his D-dimer, his ferritin, and all of those numbers were going in the wrong direction. Um, he was consented and put on the remdesivir trial. This was a randomized placebo-controlled trial. So to date, I don't know whether he got remdesivir or placebo. My sense is placebo, because he was getting it through his IV, and Jagmeet is very in tune with his body. I don't think he felt any irritation, but honestly, we don't know. And at the time when we hospitalized him, which is now a couple of months back, the protocol at Mass General was to use hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin. And so he ended up getting that. He stayed in the hospital for about 10 days. Markers went up for about 7 of those days, and he still was febrile. And this was week 3 into his whole COVID experience. And I think it was 10 days later that he was discharged, when for the first time we started seeing the CRP going down. It's taken him, we are now 8 weeks into this. He is a whole lot better. He is actually doing extremely well, but he is still short of breath. So climbing stairs or climbing a hill is not easy. So I would say he's about 95%, and I can't imagine him. He is otherwise very fit, so he would jog, etc. But right now, I don't think he can do that. But the hope is that he's going to come back to completely normal. And I think part of us learning about this was, in those days we were told it's 2 weeks, self-isolate, take care of yourself, and you're going to get better. It's something more serious than the flu. But what we are really seeing was something quite different. And I just wanted us to share this information with people, saying that if you need help, it's really important to go and seek help. Now, I was tested on the day that he was taken to the hospital, and I was positive throughout his I remain positive for about 7 weeks along with him. I've turned negative only this week, and that's why I'm at work now. And the key at MGH is, we have to have two negative tests. So I have to have one negative and 24 hours later, another negative before I can come back to work. So I'm actually rounding on the inpatient service as we speak. So that was essentially sort of our COVID experience. And part of us wanting to share was one of us getting as sick as we did, and the other one, like myself, was completely normal and completely asymptomatic throughout the course of this disease. And again, underscoring the fact that there's a lot of us who are asymptomatic walking around and probably transmitting this to others. And therefore, I think the big things we can take away from this is, until we have treatments, until we have vaccinations, until we have those things, I think the big things we have to do for society in general is masking up, social distancing. It's real. Even if the lockdown in India opens up, you have to see how you can continue with social distancing. And the best thing you can do is masks for all. And then over time, you have to test, you have to trace, you have to isolate, and you have to quarantine people who are sick, because this is not a typical virus. So that was sort of the medical part of it. I'm just going to take a pause here, Purvesh, and then go into what we are doing as an institution for COVID and how we prepared for the surge, and how actually MGH has been at the forefront of all of this. Does that sound reasonable to you? I think Purvesh is on.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nupur. I think this, whatever you brought out, is extremely crucial to faculty, senior faculty in the same campus, looking after a specialist, Jagmeet, a cardiologist, and you, oncologist. One of them has had a severe disease and consequences. Thankfully, he's all right. The other one has sailed through without any major problems. What do you think is the difference? Why is it that nothing happened to you and Jack had such a serious problem? Any insights or thoughts in that?
Yeah, no, I think there's so much we need to learn from this, and I think it may just be a couple of things. What we don't talk about with this COVID-19 is viral load.
Yes.
And I can understand that viral load is hard to figure out, largely because this is an aerosolized virus. We do nasal swabs, and the PCR test is essentially a qualitative test, right? You're either positive or you're negative. It's hard for us to figure out what the viral load is. And if we can get a surrogate of figuring out what the viral load is, I think that would be great, because that may be one of the components. Part of the problem here, unlike HIV, for example, there is really no blood test associated with this. The other thing which I really strongly believe in is your immune repertoire. And I do think everybody's immune system is a little bit different, and how you respond to it immunologically is going to be extremely different. So that there's, if you think about COVID-19, if you take 5 people with COVID-19, it's 1 in 5 who really get critically ill. Few of them are completely asymptomatic, and the others have an illness which is somewhere in between, which can be safely managed at home. And to me, that really depends on, one is probably the viral load, and two is your immune response. And whether it's certain specific immune cells, whether it's your CD4, CD8 response, whether it's your NK cells, it's unclear. And those are the studies which are ongoing as we speak.
All right. Perfect. So now you can move to the second part, which is your strategy for fighting this pandemic.
Yeah, so, unfortunately, the US has not had a national strategy, and that's really poor leadership on our part. I think you guys in India are so much more fortunate, where very strict lockdown guidelines have been issued. And because of those guidelines, in a country like India, you've been able to keep things a little bit under control. But once that lockdown opens up, it's going to be tough. So, we in Massachusetts are sort of in the eye of the storm out here. We have, I believe, close to 65,000 cases, with more than 4,500 people die from COVID. And, MGH being a city hospital, it's actually taken the brunt of the COVID-19 patients. Even today, we have 200 patients with COVID hospitalized at the institution, with half of them, so 1 in 2 people who come into the hospital are in the ICU. Um,
Wow.
uh, so we have 200, approximately 200 who are COVID positive, half of them in the ICU, and the other half, 100, so a total of 300 potential patients. The other 100 are COVID risk patients. So COVID risk are, they have the symptoms and we are testing. We don't necessarily have a test, or we don't have confirmed 2 negative tests before we can safely say that they are negative. So I think Massachusetts is a little bit ahead of the game in terms of testing. We are doing testing in a lot more patients. And what we ended up having to do, so typically our hospital has a capacity of about if you take all ICUs, we have 3 big ICUs. One's a cardiac ICU, one's a medical ICU, one's a surgical ICU, with about 20 beds each. It was about 50 to 60 beds alone. And then you have a neonatal ICU. And now we have 100 patients in the ICU, but at the surge of all of this, we had close to 160 patients in the ICU. So what we had to really very quickly do is transform some of our other units into ICUs. And the first unit which we were able to transform was our unit, which is London 9, which is the um, oncology unit. Where we made it a 36-bed ICU. Then we changed our neonatal unit into an adult ICU. We changed our PACUs. PACUs are post-surgery, post-op anesthesia recovery areas, which allows us to have ventilators. We converted those into ICUs, and very quickly from 60 beds, we were able to get to about 160 to 2. We had the capacity for 200 bed ICU at our institution. Now, along with this, what we also ended up having to do was, oncology care did not go away. So transplant, there were some, we put sort of elective transplants on hold, but other transplants were still ongoing. CAR T cells were still ongoing. And for those patients, there is the potential of needing ICU care. So we did not admit patients until we had assurance that we would have an ICU bed for that patient. The other thing we had to make sure, at least for the CAR T cell patients, was we had adequate tocilizumab in the hospital, because as you all know now, TOCI is being used for COVID-19 as well, especially if you have an inflammatory response. So what we very quickly did was transform some of these other units into ICUs. With that, we had to give training to our nurses. So there's a lot of redeployment which happened in the hospital. And we had to very quickly train ICU nurses. Now, as of right now, what we are doing in the hospital is, if for whatever reason, we're trying to avoid intubation, but if they need intubation, we're doing prone intubation. So patients are on their belly. And when we do that, you all know this, nursing care gets doubled. You need more in terms of nursing care to take care of a prone patient. But we had to do a lot of training for our physicians and our nursing, and to get familiar with sort of ventilatory support care. The other piece which we did on our BMT unit was opened up a BMT unit where we could use pressors. Typically, we cannot use pressors in our regular floors. They can only be used in ICU. But as long as a patient required just one pressor for a little bit of sepsis, we trained our nursing staff on our BMT service so that we wouldn't have to take away a ventilator from another patient. And along with this, I think the 2 key areas where we really had to work hard with was, one was the Department of Internal Medicine, hematology, oncology, because we were taking care of all of these COVID patients, and then training of how to actually use the protective PPE appropriately in our patients was something which we ended up having to do. We also had to very quickly train up. Our palliative care people worked extremely hard. And what we ended up doing was, try to address goals of care of patients as they were coming into the hospital so that we were not doing unnecessary intubations in 80 and 90-year-old people. We also have uh, tried our very best we had to very quickly train our staff. Now, oncology is used to taking care of terminally ill patients, but not the rest of the hospital. So we ended up having to spend a lot of resources in training these personnel to have these conversations of end of life conversations and end of life discussions and goals of care discussions, and palliative care has been extremely helpful there. What I think was really useful was also, our psych oncology has played a huge role here in talking about end of life issues and grievance issues, because part of the problem with COVID 19 is the isolation which our patients feel. For example, when Jagmeet was admitted, 10 days I did not get, even though I work at this hospital, I was not allowed to visit him. So my only connection with him was through FaceTime and talking to him on the phone. Um, and what we are having to do, which I think is the most traumatic experience for us out here, is talking to our patients and their relatives and having these extremely difficult conversations about end of life and seeing their families dying. I think our nurses have done an incredible job. What we have in the room is an iPad for the patients so that even for a physician, we're not constantly going back and forth in the hospital. We are monitoring a patient because they're all on tele and they all have oxygen sats. And we have the iPad where we can connect with them. And we are doing our very best by trying to keep the families connected with FaceTime and iPads and so on and so forth. So technology has played a huge role, but it's had to be a learning which has happened over a few weeks. So it does take, an emotional toll on people in addition to the physical toll of just taking care of these really, really sick people. The other thing we are seeing also is, the feeling is that it's all old people. It's not really all old people. It's young people like Jagmeet who are otherwise fit are also becoming extremely sick. And those were things which I think are kind of difficult to deal with. So I'm going to stop here and, I'm happy to take questions. But I think preparing and having some plans in place and having protocols in place is going to help you all get through this most effectively.
Thank you very much, Nupur. I think your personal experiences was very insightful, and I'm sure that there will be questions during the panel discussion. Hopefully, you will have the time to be around. I will now